Hey everybody, Pete Trent, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Today's episode is a heavy one. We have 3 people on as guests. We don't often go this big, but I thought in this case it was important. Scott and I co-host. The subject is a documentary called The Gift, which tells the tale of Corporal Jason Dunham, who on the 14th of April 2004 in Baghdad, Iraq, jumped on a grenade, saving the lives of 2 Marines immediately next to him and possibly several others in the area. He did not survive the blast. His commander at the time, who was then Captain Trent Gibson, now Colonel Trent Gibson, also joins the movie makers, Rick and David. This is ultimately a story of sacrifice, valor, leadership, and brotherhood, and the movie is incredible. I should also mention that Vinny Rocco Vargas, who's been on the show before, and you guys see him on The Mayans, also an Army veteran, is a co-producer on the show, so there's a lot of names that we're familiar with. This is a powerful, powerful episode, and I know you're going to enjoy it. The things I want you to pull out of this, though, really are the leadership aspects of what it means for these Marines to go out and care for each other. I think we all can learn a lot from that. Okay, a couple things real quick. If you like what we're doing, if you're new to the show, subscribe. Put 5 stars, and wherever you listen, write a little review. That truly helps us a lot. That helps other people discover it. If you send the show off to a friend, say, hey, this is a really good episode, listen to this one. As we all work to try to stick together and survive through this coronavirus thing, I want you to know that I'm thinking about all of you. Do the same thing for each other. Reach out. Tell someone you love them. Take them out to dinner just as soon as we can all safely do so. All right, one other thing. As always, we support Save the Brave. SaveTheBrave.org. Click on the Donate tab. Put a small amount of money in. If you're already doing that, hey, thank you so much. Let me know so I can make sure we thank you openly. I appreciate all of you. And today I'm going to mention a friend of mine, Mark Azevedo, because this episode, as we were recording, I was thinking about him, and I've got a little something special for him. I love the heck out of that guy, and just wanted to say thanks to Mark for all of his support. All right, here comes David, Rick, and Trent. Get ready.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, my name's Rick Milewski.
This is Dave Kniess, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, it's super hard to get that right sometimes.
We could have a cue card.
Yeah.
We could
Did I say it right?
Kim didn't put the cue cards out. That was the problem.
To break it down.
Marine's like a good whiteboard. Too.
Yes. We got
Dry
Kim
erase.
as our production assistant here in Dave's house at his studio. Some lovely beverages and popovers that we all passed on because we're trying not to be too
Fat.
Yeah, fat. And obviously Scott Huesing, best-selling, award-winning author of Echo and Ramadi is here. And maybe even another guest after that. But we're here to talk about your guys' documentary, The Gift.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
So 15 years ago, roughly, Dave met Jason Dunham on a plane.
Yeah, so 15 years ago, I took a flight east, and it was a red eye, and I sat next to this young Marine. He had a high and tight, and we started shooting the shit, and he was just very charismatic and full of energy and just, you know, the kind of person you meet, whether you're at a party or wherever, at a bar, and you just don't want the night to end. So I thought this kid was really special, and as he left, I looked at him, and we talked about Iraq. It was getting ready to kick off, and I said, take care of yourself, because I figured he'd be gone. He was a Marine from 29 Palms, and he just kind of gave me that, and all his Marines described that smile, that shit-eating grin he always had. And he said, yeah, no worries, man. And he went on his way. And then flash forward 2004, somebody at work was telling me about this website, icasualties.org, and it lists all the KIAs from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I went home that night, went down the list, and I saw this one name that kind of jumped out at me. I didn't remember his last name. I just remember him as Jay. And it said 29 Palms, Scio, New York, Marine Corporal. So I was like, that kid I met from the plane, he was from 29 Palms. He was from upstate New York. So I Googled his name and I hit the images and his picture popped up. And I just felt really, it was like all the blood rushed out of my face or something. And I realized it was him, and it was, it sucked, because he was I just remember this happy, kid with that $1 million smile and all that other stuff. And I sat down and I wrote about meeting him, and I posted it on the Quezon Veterans website because I had a teacher I did a doc on, and I went to Vietnam with him. And I know these guys like to listen to stories about other Marines, today.
Yeah.
So I posted it on there, and that ended up in his hometown paper. And then his mom called me, and I didn't know who it was at first, so I just let it go to voicemail. And then I listened to it, and it's, "Hi, this is Deb Dunham, and I read your story about meeting my son, and I'd really like to talk to you." And, I didn't know what to do. I was like, do I call her? I was like, what am I going to say to her?
Yeah.
What do you say to a parent of, somebody, they lost their son? What am I going to say? So I didn't call her. And a few weeks go by, and the phone rings again, and I see it's the same number, and I don't answer it. I let it go to voicemail. And I literally sat there on my couch for about a half an hour, telling myself, that I need to call her, and I finally did. I picked up the phone and I called her. And that conversation lasted 2 hours, with her and her husband. And anybody like Trent will attest, these people are just, they're like family when you meet them. They're just those kind of people. And I found then I was on a plane to New York. They invited me up to spend a long weekend with them over the 4th of July. After meeting his parents, I understood why he was the way he was. Because those people, they're like a second set of parents to me. I showed up on their doorstep, and Deb said, well, where's your bag? And I said, well, I checked into that little motel in town. And she said, Dan, go get his bags. You're staying here with us. And I was like, wow. And I never met him before.
Yeah.
And that was a Friday. By Sunday, it was all hugs and kisses. And, and that was the start of it. And and that makes it even worse. When you meet somebody like that and then they lose someone, it makes it worse because of how good they are. So now, after 15 years, I'm so close to them now. I was on the phone with them yesterday, and it's the same every time. I love you. We'll talk to you soon. It's like their parents to me.
Yeah.
So that's how it started. And, I was going to do a doc back then, but it was more of when I met them, I said, when those guys get back, I'm going to sit them down and have them tell good stories about your son, because I'm an editor and I can do that. I can do that for you. I'm able to do that. So that's what I started to do. And then the news started coming out about what happened and what he did. And a lot of the Quezon guys were like, you really need to document this. You should do a documentary on this kid. So I started bringing some of these Kilo guys down here and sat them down. And
What are Kilo guys?
Kilo 37, Kilo Company.
That's their unit.
3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. Yeah. And I started sitting, and this is, 6 months after they got back, or after it happened, really. So I started sitting them down, and it was the hardest. And I'd done, interviews with Marines who had fought at Quezon, which was hard, 30-something years after the fact.
Yeah.
But 6 months after the fact was extremely hard. And it was just an emotional roller coaster of interviews. They just weren't ready. And I wasn't ready for something like that, So I kind of put it on the back burner. And, but every year, you start something, you never finish it. But you've been with this family the whole time, going to the White House, for the Medal of Honor ceremony, going to the christening of the ship up in Maine, and going through, and it's an emotional roller coaster every time. For me, it is. I can't imagine what it is for the Marines every time they do it. It's like picking at that scab, right? So, I went through all this stuff, but in the back of my mind, you're always like, well, you need to finish that thing you started. You need to finish it. And every April, on the anniversary of his death, I would say that to myself, like, today's the 22nd.
Right.
This is the day he died. When are you going to finish that? And, Rick, who I moved out to California, we're both former Navy guys. We sat down a year and a half ago.
About your.
Yeah, we've worked for other people our whole lives, telling their stories or getting paid to tell their stories. And we both complain about it, like we need to do our own thing.
Yeah.
So we started coming up with ideas about veteran stuff with some people we know. And then Rick said, well, what about Jason Dunham? What about that story? And I was like, you want to do that? And he's like, yeah, I think it's a great story. And I always thought it was a great story, and I use this as an analogy in another person I talked to. It's like a chef who makes food all the time and he's so close to it. Yeah. You don't know if it's a good story, right? So I really didn't know because you're so close to it. But thank God Rick is my other...
Right. So he sends me this drive, and again, we're looking for a project to work on together for however many years that we've been out here, and so we went to college together, whatever. And I had been doing a lot of documentary work, most recently over the past 10 years. And, just knowing what it takes to tell a story like this, the story itself, of course, being a good story, but just the footage that he had collected after all these years, going to the dedication of the USS Jason Dunham, the Medal of Honor ceremony, just these original interviews he got with these guys back in, what was it, 04? Yeah, 04, and Deb and Dan, and just having access to all this is just, and it's just how close these guys are. It's amazing, Yeah. So, and he has such a personal connection, and that came across in those. Even he just met those guys, but they're so willing to talk to him, And so just knowing what it takes to put one of these things together, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, this is like one of the greatest stories.
What makes the story so great? And for listeners, they need to understand there's also a book called The Gift of Valor, written by Mike Phillips. Phenomenal. And I listened to it on tape when I was a student in Quantico, telling Jason's story of heroism and that of his family. And then, again, 15 years removed, we have, as we were talking about before the show, it's like, how do we all know each other and these crazy connections? And we could sit here and bore each other to tears playing the name game. But what is it about Jason's story that makes it so much different than the thousands of other veteran stories that have been killed in action or been awarded high medals?
I want to take that question because it's perfect. But we also have Trent, who's Jason's commander at the time. Will you grab a mic and sit in here with us and kind of tell us the story? Because that's a perfect question for you too, like what made him special and how did that go?
So it started in October of 2003. I'd taken command of Kilo in Karbala, Iraq at the end of May, beginning of June 2003. Just after I graduated Expeditionary Warfare School, I flew over to Iraq and took over Kilo. I spent 3 months in country with him in Karbala at the end of OAF-1, during which the invasion kicked off in March, and then combat operations eventually scaled down to the point that there was this general feeling that the war had been won. 3-7 came out in. They left country in September, end of August of 2003. We were the second last battalion out. So September for us was a 30-day post-deployment leave period. And during that deployment, Rudy, the guy who's just here, my XO, he was standing battalion officer of the day one day during that leave block, and he called me up this day he was on duty, and he said, hey, so we just got 30-something Marines from 3-4, one of our sister battalions. They just got dropped to us. Apparently they're too short to deploy with 3-4 again. Don't know exactly what that means, why they're coming to us, because there was no word that we were going back yet. So we got these 30-something new NCOs from 3-4. And so when we came back from our post-deployment leave block, that first day back, we had a company formation at the end of the day. So I wanted to welcome those 7 new NCOs to the company. So we had a formation. We're standing in a school circle. I welcomed those 7 NCOs to the Kilo family and said, First Sergeant, you got it. and grabbed those 7 NCOs, and they're all corporals. Brought them over to talk to them. I stood there in the ditch next to the barracks in 29 Palms. And I needed something important to say to them because they had just come to our fucking family. So I thought back to what I had told Kilo the dad took over in Karbala. And I told him I believe in 3 things. I said, I believe in leadership by example. I believe in self-sacrifice for the greater good. And I believe that one man can make a difference. I said, that's what you should expect from me. And that's what I'm going to fucking expect from you. And one of those Marines was Jason Dunham, a fucking machine gunner from Kilo 3-4. His platoon commander had been one of my students at IOC. You know, it's extremely small world. That was October. 2 months later, we find ourselves, after we've just found out that we're going back in late February, early March. So we had 5 months back in Kniess before we returned. We were the first battalion to return to Iraq for OAF2. And we were in the middle of one of 2 battalion level training exercises that we were going to have before we went back. And it was the second week of December, and we were 3 days from leaving on our 2-week Christmas leave block / pre-deployment leave. And so it was Wednesday. We're in the middle of this 5-day training exercise that 1-7 was facilitating for us, doing station training for the types of missions that we were expecting squads and platoons to get in a stability and security operations environment, which was we were expecting to go back to, which was all bullshit because we're just going to be fucking straight up counterinsurgency. Anyway, so we're going through the training, and it was the afternoon of Wednesday, and my first sergeant comes up to me and says, "Hey, sir, we're getting 33 boots tomorrow from SOI. They're coming in tonight." And I was like, "Fucking excuse me? Tonight? We're getting 33 new Marines? Where the fuck did this?" And he's like, "Sir, don't shoot their messenger. I just found out from the sergeant major, so don't chop my head off." All right, you're right, for sergeant. Got it. Okay. So
why is getting 33 new Marines bad? Just real briefly.
Not bad, but holy fuck, we're in the middle of a goddamn training exercise, and we had no clue that they were even coming.
Right.
So that's something you want to plan for is getting a third of the volume of manpower you currently have. So we had 90-something Marines that were combat veterans that we were going to deploy with. Eventually, we deployed with 122 trigger pullers, right? And so, 33 of those guys are brand new. And by the way, they're showing up tonight. And
surprise!
Yeah, right.
Who's got extra blankets?
It's typical Marine Corps. So, when you expect it to happen, it's easier to smile when it does. But I wouldn't smile on that day. I was pissed off. But I had to figure out what we're going to do with these guys, because our platoons were all different sizes. When OAF1, before it even ended, before I even got there in Iraq, the battalion had dumped like 200 something NCOs to either permanent change of station orders or EAS, end of active service. So the battalion had hemorrhaged fucking leadership. So the platoons were different sizes, right? And if I recall, Kilo 2 was about 20 Marines at that point. A TO freaking platoon is 41 Marines and one officer. So Kilo 2 had about 20 Marines. Kilo 3 had about 25. And I knew that if I just topped all the platoons off at 30, that overnight Kilo 2 would be twice as inexperienced as Kilo 3 because it'd have 10 boots, whereas Kilo 3 would only have 5, right? Mm. And that's not a situation you want to go into combat with. One platoon twice as inexperienced as the other. And we had an imbalance in combat experience and an imbalance in NCO leadership. So we had 3 factors there. Plus, one of the most compelling factors was my weapons platoon, which I was never happy with in the 3 months I was in Karbala at the end of OIF1, because it was an awkward organization for a unconventional environment, right? You've got 4 platoons in the company, And so you're constantly under this manpower management cycle that you're trying to manage to get Marines on a mission, but make sure the Marines that are coming up on the next mission have fucking slept at least a few hours so they can fucking go do that mission that they're coming up on. And by the way, you've got perimeter security to worry about, and you've got local security patrols to worry about, never mind the deep patrols. And weapons platoon was just poorly organized for that, because it's a conventional offensive and defensive type organization. But if weapons platoon was going on a patrol in Karbala, they had to give up their machine guns and borrow a rifle from some Marine in first platoon, right? But then when I got there and I put machine guns on most of the fucking posts on our defense that require a school trained machine gunner to stand behind it, you know, those guys only live in weapons platoon. So when Kilo 1 is on perimeter security, they don't have any organic machine gunners, right? So then you got to rape weapons platoon so first platoon can stand post. It's just it's freaking nightmare. It made no sense. So I thought, well, if I've got all these issues going on, I've got experience imbalance, I've got leadership imbalance, I've got new blood imbalance, and I've got this weird weapons platoon organism that I'm not happy with. I need to do something. But time is short, because after Friday, when we all go on leave for 2 weeks, we come back on the 2nd of January to March Air Force Base to kick off our last battalion level training exercise. And then it's turn your fucking gear in and get ready to fucking deploy.
Right.
But
which is not a lot of time to get anything done.
No. Let alone start thinking about how the company's organized.
Reconfigure an entire company.
Right.
Now.
But despite all of the issues with it, I finally concluded that the right thing to do was simply reorganize the entire company. So I put the word out that this is what was going to happen. And then I started immediately getting negative feedback from the NCOs. And they had a legitimate reason to kick back on that. And to the man, it was unit cohesion. Sir, we all fucking did the march up. We spent this much time in country. We all fucking know each other. And you're going to break up my fucking team when we're going back to combat? They were not happy with it. And it's a compelling reason. It makes good sense, but it was not the most important reason to not reorganize. And I knew that there was going to be a troop to task challenge during our return. And I needed maximum flexibility in the fucking company. And if I had 12 equally capable rifle squads that could perform any fucking mission that was called upon them without raping another fucking platoon to do it, that would be the smartest way to go about it. So I got to the first sergeant and I said, First Sergeant, I want you to dump the company in a pile. We're going to hold a draft. I want you to print off a fucking roster of every Marine from sergeant on down. And we only had 2 sergeants in the company. So it was, you know, a dozen something corporals and all the rest are lance corporals and below. And Kilo 1 is going to get first pick, first round. Kilo 2, second pick, first round. Kilo 4 gets fourth pick, first round. And in order to make it fair, second round, Kilo 4 will get first pick.
Snake it.
And Kilo 1 will get fourth pick, right? So tomorrow morning, pull in the platoon commanders and have a fucking draft. And at the time, we only had 2 officer platoon commanders, Dave Fleming and Jason Johnson, Kilo 1 and Kilo 2. Kilo 3 was Staff Sergeant Adam Walker, and Kilo 4 was Staff Sergeant John Ferguson. And the 2 guys who took it seriously were the 2 staff sergeants. And so Ferg spent the whole damn night prior up going over this roster, soup to fucking nuts, looking at all the possibilities of how this draft could shake out, but prioritizing his draft picks. So the next day, he chose in the 4th pick, first round, Corporal Travis Strucker, a wrestler from Iowa, and then on first pick, second round was a machine gunner, Corporal Jason Dunham, someone who everyone in the company had seen in the past 2 months perform at an unusual level, despite the fact that he was not a combat veteran. He comes from another unit, right? So there's that, you're an outsider factor, but he just gave a shit. And everyone could tell that he fucking gave a shit. So he had this leadership potential as well as some exhibited leadership skills that the Marines in the unit, the leadership, they fucking valued. And John Ferguson valued it highly, enough to make him, Jason Dunham, his fucking second pick.
Yeah.
Out of all the other leadership in the company. And the fact that he wasn't a fucking rifle squad leader, he never held a fucking billet like rifle squad leader. And at the end of the day, when you look at the organization of those platoons after the draft was complete, and you look at the personality of them, the personality of those platoons are a direct reflection of the men who made the picks. So Kilo 4, John Ferguson, quiet, unassuming leader, not a yeller, just a fucking solid guy. Travis Struker, Jason Dunham, Sean Gibson, all three of those cats, quiet guys. They're not yellers. They're fucking solid. They know their shit. And they're just fucking good people.
Yeah.
Right? They're just good Marines. They're not fucking standouts, but they're good. You know, they're not the guys who draw attention to themselves, but they're fucking solid. And then their platoon commander, Brian Robinson, who came into us late, just right out of IOC. He's a tall, unassuming guy. They nicknamed him Bull because he was like Bull from Night Court, right? In demeanor, all the way, and stature. So that platoon had a definite personality, and then that personality was a product of John Ferguson. And so that's how Dunham wound up as a platoon commander, as a squad leader. And then our first month in country, I had to give him up. I gave up 2 fucking platoons. Lima Company under Rick Gannon, rest his soul, was the battalion main effort up at the border town of Huesing. It was the westernmost edge of our zone. And Lieutenant Colonel Lopez said, "Hey, Captain Gibson, you're fucking giving up 2 platoons for your first month in zone. And you'll get one of those platoons back after we've been there for a month." Roger that, sir.
Now you knew exactly how the team leaders and squad leaders felt when the colonel is now saying, "You got to break up your team, Captain." You're like, "Wait, that's a shitty idea." And you were just hearing that from, the corporals and sergeants. And what's important too to remind people is when you say corporals and sergeants, or even staff sergeants like Adam Walker, who's a dear friend of mine, corporal's 20 years old, in charge of 13 other lives. Staff Sergeant Walker at the time, probably 28, 29 years old.
Yeah.
In charge of 30 lives.
Yeah.
That when you look back, and you and I are getting a little gray in our beard now too, is you really wonder, how do they do it? And then you look at a guy like Dunham, who the gift in this whole film is about. Aside from the fact that he exhibited leadership traits through his actions, I mean, we've talked about this, me and Dave. Physically, he's built like a fucking superhero. And how could you not have a bromance on an airplane ride with Jason? I mean, the guy was a good-looking kid. He was gregarious.
He's all-American.
And it was just...
He's all-American.
Yeah, just built like a superhero, and everything about him oozed, I want to follow that guy.
Yeah. I said he wasn't a standout, and the squad leaders were standouts. Not in the typical Marine type way, right? The outgoing, brash, loud, in-your-face type guy. But standouts nonetheless in fucking basic leadership, right? Just being the kind of guy that other Marines are going to emulate because they want to be like him because he treats them with fucking respect. And that's what made him not unique, not special, but that's what made him special to the Marines in his fucking squad, right? On the 13th of April, the night before that fateful mission, he's writing his operations order for the next day. And to put it all in context, Kilo 4 had just come back to me a couple weeks earlier. And their entire time while they were with Lima Company, they were operating on a platoon level. Every time they went in zone, it was an entire platoon together, 3 squads, right? Brian Robinson led every fucking patrol as the platoon commander, therefore the patrol leader. Everything was platoon level for Lima Company in their zone. Kilo Company didn't have that fucking luxury. I had 2 goddamn platoons I was trying to hold down a fucking 6 kilometer long zone with. And so we operated on squad level. That was the only way you could skin that cat, was with a single rifle squad at a time. So when Ten Colonel Lopez came to me and said, hey, Captain Gibson, tomorrow we're going in zone and we're going to the Crabbla police station, and I'm bringing the first 2 weeks of pay to the Crabbla Police Department for their new policeman that we just created out of whole cloth at the police academy that my attached MP platoon just ran for these guys. I'm going in zone tomorrow, and we're going to pay the police chief to put these guys to work. And you're going in there, you're going to reconnoiter a patrol base for a 48-hour or 96-hour 4-day patrolling operation. And we just taught these guys the basic skills. And what I want is for 4 days straight, these guys to patrol alongside Marines day and night, doing what they were just trained to do. I want the people of Crabbla to see their police force at work. So make it happen, and I'll see you in zone tomorrow. And so the platoon next up in the rotation was Kilo 4. So I grabbed Robinson. I said, get me in zone tomorrow with a fucking squad at 09, whatever. We're meeting the fucking battalion commander at the Crabbla police station. So he grabbed Dunham and assigned him the mission to lead that patrol into Crabbla. And it wouldn't just be his squad, it would be his squad plus all the Marines that were getting us into zone. They were manning those fucking Humvees, right? Plus the company commander and all the other strap hangers that we were going to take with us. So Dunham was all of a sudden going from being a squad leader in a platoon-sized patrol to being the patrol leader of 25-something Marines. So he had a lot of fucking weight on his shoulder just like that.
Yeah.
And he spent all day getting his Marines ready for the fucking mission. And come midnight, there's 3 Marines in the COC. It's myself, my radio operator, Cresswell, on the radio, and fucking Dunham at this goddamn picnic table writing his order. Utes and boots, no shirt because it was fucking hot. Bare-chested, sitting there writing out his 5-paragraph order. And it was midnight, which meant that the damn mess platoon had put out midnight rations, mostly for the Marines in India Company that were performing perimeter security for the battalion FOB. And in walk 2 of Dunham's Marines, his 2 fire team leaders, Lance Corporal Bill Hampton and Lance Corporal Josh Carvajal. And they had a fucking plate of chow on a cardboard tray, fucking tray rat eggs and a fucking slice of hammers. And he looks up and he says, what's this? And both these guys were combat veterans from OAF1, and they had both held an initial sense of resentment against Dunham being assigned as their squad leader because he didn't have combat experience, And so that was the chest thumping touchstone at that point. I was OAF1 and you weren't. They quickly figured out that he was a fucking leader and that it didn't matter whether he had combat experience or not because he was just a good fucker. So he said, what's this? And Hampton says, well, you've been taking care of us all day, and we know you haven't had time to even eat chow. We want to make sure you at least got something. So he thanked him, and I sat there and I watched that. And I realized I was seeing something I had never fucking seen before. At the basic school, as an officer, you go through a 6-month course and you learn from these Marine captains who've been there and done that. And more than the tactics that are throughout that whole 6-month period, above all, the one thread that runs through that entire curriculum is leadership, right? And I remember one of my instructors talking about a true leader, you'll know it when you see his Marines taking care of him. Like if you're, as a platoon commander, if you're a good fucking platoon commander, you won't need to dig your own fighting hole in the defense. Your Marines will see that you've got so much other shit on your plate and you're fucking do it. They're going to take care of you and dig your fighting hole for you. And so I had this image in my head that, maybe someday I'd see that. And there it was right in front of me. And to me, it may sound corny, but what I was seeing in that moment was those 2 Marines placing a crown on his fucking head and saying, "You're our leader." I realized in that moment that title isn't something that anyone else can give you. That you could have seniors say, "Hey, he's a good leader." Your peers could think you're a good leader, but the only ones who can actually bestow that title upon you are the ones shit lead. And I saw that happen, and I felt like I was just a fucking quiet witness to it behind a plate of glass or something, I saw it unfold in front of me, and I didn't really, it was surreal that it was happening right there in front of me. And then Carbajal and Hampton walked out, and Dunham went back to write his order. And I thought, I should take a fucking photo of him. I had this computer, or this goddamn camera, a little digital camera that the Battalion S2 gave out, one to each company for intel purposes, damn SSC, sensitive site exploitation after contact or whatever. And it was in my fucking flak. And I thought I should get up and take a photo of him. And I was fucking smoked. I was exhausted. And I didn't get up. I didn't take that fucking photo. But I sat there and I watched him, and I thought to myself, would I ever do if I lost a fucking Marine? Someone who's just such a genuine leader that his guys are bringing him fucking chow to make sure that he's taken care of. But I didn't get up. And then the next morning, we rolled out at 08. And the first thing that every patrol at that point was doing before we left the fucking battalion wire was we would conduct a rehearsal for react to enemy contact. We had lost our first Marine 5 days prior to that, on the 9th of April. PFC Elias Torres was killed in a kilometer-long ambush in the village of Sada, which was I had Crabble and Sada in my zone, and Sada was on the east, Crabble was on the west. And he was killed because, for a couple of reasons, but one of them was that we hadn't been anticipating that type of contact and the need to be able to respond to it. So after losing Torres on the 9th, I mandated that every single fucking patrol that left the goddamn wire would rehearse, a no shit fucking rehearsal, react to enemy contact before they left the wire. And so it was also Dunham's first time to rehearse that battle drill. So as we approached the wire, I called over the radio, contact right, and vehicle stopped, Marines jumped out, they did their thing. And there were some things they screwed up. So I called the leaders up on me, Dunham, his fire team leaders, the gun truck leaders, and the vehicle commanders. We talked about the things that needed to be fixed. And Dunham realized that it hadn't shaken out the way he wanted to, that the battle drill didn't go the way it was supposed to. And he had those fucking Wiley X goggles on. He had this look of disappointment in his face. You could see in his eyes. He felt like he had let me down. And I could see it. So I slapped him on the shoulder and I said, "That's right. We'll fix it. We've got a job to do. Let's fucking go." So we got out there, linked up with Colonel Lopez, and he did his thing. And then we went over behind the police station and started reconnoitering this prospective patrol base for that 96-hour patrolling operation with Iraqi police. It was a water treatment plant. It had been under construction, but at some point in its lifetime had stopped being built. So it was a really good compound with like 12-foot high walls around the whole thing and several buildings on the interior. And I'd brought Staff Sergeant Ferguson as the platoon sergeant for Kilo 4, because Kilo 4 for that upcoming mission, they were going to be perimeter security. And so I wanted him to get eyes on exactly what he was going to be defending as the perimeter security platoon. So we went behind the police station, we got into the water treatment plant, and there was an Iraqi family who was squatting in the headquarters building of that treatment plant. So we bypassed them, excused ourselves, and went up top to the roof to get a good eye on things. And I hadn't been up there for long, and we heard some explosions to our west towards Lima Company's position. And Lima Company had been getting hit straight for 2 weeks. They'd been getting mortared every day with 60 millimeter mortars. And Dunham comes running up the fucking stairs up to the roof. And I looked at him, I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "I think Lima's getting hit." I said, "Well, let's go get those motherfuckers." He thought that, finally, for the first time in 2 weeks, right, someone was outside the fucking wire in a position that the Mooj probably wasn't expecting. And so we had a chance to get those bastards. So I said, get the fucking squad on the move. And we had gun trucks and 2 high-back Humvees that got us in the zone, and they were satelliting around us. At the time, they weren't right there where we were. So we got outside of that compound and just started running west down the MSR towards the sound of the explosions. The radio operator Sanders from Oklahoma, Jason Sanders, got a hold of the trucks and vectored them back to us. So they came screeching to a halt. We jumped on and started pushing west. And then, so once we were in the trucks, then I had a battalion radio net that I could hear. And we figured out that it wasn't Lima Company getting hit. It was actually the battalion commander's patrol that had been fucking hit on their way to Lima Company's position. Right at the boundary between my zone and Lima Company's zone. And about the time we figured out over the radio traffic that it was a fucking ambush on the battalion commander's patrol, a fucking RPG flies over the goddamn Vic in front of me, right over fucking Lance Corporal Carvajal's head. So we knew we had arrived, right? So, no need to figure out anything more on the fucking net.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Yes.
So we got out of the trucks and got up against a wall, and that spot we were at was a triangular shaped village at the western edge of my zone, right up against a wadi that delineated the eastern edge of Lima Company's zone. And it was just this triangular shaped village that was populated mostly by shepherds, and it was half unpopulated anyway. So it was prime place to fucking set up shop if you wanted to hit someone, because it wasn't really an occupied urban area. As it turns out, the vast majority of contact we got in that time frame was in the HK. And it was the first place I saw contact 2 or 3 weeks earlier, God no, a month earlier, when I was there on advance party with the other company commanders and company gunnies in the battalion before the battalion proper even got there. Our first time out the wire, we got ambushed in the HK. And the Army unit that we were with was a self-propelled unit that was organic to the 1st to the 3rd, or maybe attached to the 1st to the 3rd Cav. That was the Army cavalry squadron that we replaced. And they were the only unit in that squadron, in that battalion, that was mounted in Humvees. Everyone else is in Bradleys and tanks. So they were the closest to a straight leg grunt you could get. And they fucking immediately called a damn battle drill audible, cordoned off the fucking village and then swept through it and killed one Mooj and captured 2 others just like that. So I'd seen the battle drill already. So I told Dunham, I said, hey, get the fucking trucks on the south and we're going to sweep north to south. So set up the cordon and then we'll fucking sweep into them. He said, all right, you go with Carbajal and I'm going with Hampton. Roger that. So Hampton's fire team with Dunham and Ferg, the platoon sergeant, and a scout sniper and some other cats and dogs that were attached to the patrol that day. They swept the eastern half of the HK, and I went with Carbajal and we started sweeping on the western half. And we got to a certain point where we wound up, Carbajal and the team I was with, we wound up clearing to a certain point and then wound up on the western edge overlooking the Wadi. And then we heard small arms firing back to the east. And we looked to the southeast and we saw civilian vehicles backing up out of this road, hell-bent for election, trying to get the fuck out of way of something. So myself and Carbajal and our Arab-hating, atheistic Kurd linguist by the name of Sam, who was just pure fucking money, we ran over there, stopped those vehicles, checked them. They were going to a fucking wedding. Sam's like, sir, these guys are good. So we let him go, and then we started pushing down the street that they had been coming up, and we saw a Marine, and it was Sergeant Reynolds, who was one of our attached scout snipers. I brought him along so he could reconnoiter some scout sniper hides for the patrolling operation. And he yelled at me down the street there was a white pickup, that we need to find a fucking white pickup that had gone south. So we pushed south all the way to this railroad track that ran across a berm that delineated the southern edge of the HK. And we got there and we couldn't find a fucking pickup. But at that time, several of my Humvees from Cat White came screaming out of Huesing from our west into the HK, past us. And we didn't have comm with him. We had shit for comm at the time. So Carbajal got up on a 3-story building in another water treatment plant that we wound up using months later as a patrolling base. And he got comms with Hampton's fire team. But I think he was talking to Ferg. He must have been talking to Ferg because Hampton was wounded and evacuated by then. By the time we got to him, those Humvees that had come racing up, they were evacuating Dunham, Miller, and Hampton. But we didn't know any of that. So we worked our way back to where Ferg was. So we approached that same road, but from the south, and we got on site, and there were several vehicles. Actually, there was only one vehicle left in the road. It was a white Toyota Land Cruiser. All the fucking doors were open. There were several weapons, AKs, RPGs, stacked against the fucking wall on the south side of that dirt road. And Ferg saw me show up, so he came over, and he just he didn't fucking wait for a question or anything. He said, hey, Miller and Hampton are going to be okay. And there's something about the way he said Miller and Hampton are going to be okay that told me that someone wasn't fucking okay. I said, what the fuck are you saying? He says, it's Dunham. So I did another unpopular thing, and I told Ferg, we got to finish clearing out the fucking rest of the village. So, I mean, the Marines were smoked by that point, but they fucking did it anyway. And they cleared out the rest of the village, and they got a couple of guys that they deemed to be suspicious, and we detained them. And there was a fucking dead mooj in the goddamn road. I started checking things out to try and piece together what happened. And while I was looking things over, Ferguson was telling me his perspective on what had happened. I noticed a piece of yellowish green Kevlar on the deck. It was just a little tiny scrap. And then I looked up against the wall where the row of those weapons were leaned up against the wall, AKs, RPGs. There was a fucking piece of Kevlar up against the wall. And I picked it up and I was looking at it, and I first thought, I just assumed that it was a piece of Kevlar from a Humvee door, because armored Humvees armored on the inside doors with Kevlar, right? And around St. Paddy's Day, if not on St. Paddy's Day, the battalion had taken its first casualties. We lost 2 Marines in a fucking rear wheel mine strike, not even a kilometer from where we were, several hundred meters to our west, at the western edge of the HK, just above that fucking wadi. A Humvee from Cat Red had, I believe it was Cat Red, had hit a fucking mine, but on the rear wheel. Flipped the fucking vehicle, killed the Marine on top of that, who's riding that fucking seat above that wheel immediately, and killed, I think PFC Smith was his name, was the gunner. Just fucking flipped the vehicle upside down. And several days later, Staff Sergeant Lassiter, Cat White Platoon Sergeant, on a patrol on Route Diamond, which was, there were 2 MSRs that ran through our zone. Jade was a southern one, Route 12 that ran from fucking Damascus to Baghdad, right? And then there was a frontage road, 1 kilometer to the north was Diamond. And they rolled up 2 fucking moves in a goddamn BMW with pistols, a GPS with grids in our fucking battalion firm base, and PFC Smith's ID card. So we knew they were scrubbing the fucking sites, right? And so I thought that maybe this was just a piece of Kevlar from that mine strike. And then I'm looking at it, and I realized that it had a familiar shape to it, and it was the fucking ear scoop on the goddamn Kevlar helmet. And I realized I was holding a piece of a fucking Kevlar helmet. And I turned to Ferg and I said, where's Dunham's helmet? And he called over his Marines to grab Dunham's gear, because they kept Miller, Hampton's, and Dunham's gear and weapons when they casevaced it. And they went through their shit and said, it ain't here. And I was looking across this 12, 15 foot wide dirt road, right? And I realized it was covered in tiny fucking scraps of Kevlar. It was probably covering a 20 square meter area, tiny pieces of Kevlar. So, this realization is dawning on us collectively. And I told Ferg, I said, let's get this shit picked up. I want every fucking scrap of this shit picked up. It sickened me to present the enemy with any fucking scrap of evidence that they could get to us. I didn't want them to see that they could fucking hurt us. So one of the Marines had a couple of 2-gallon Ziploc bags in his butt pack. And so pulled it out, and they filled these 2 fucking Ziploc bags with Kevlar. It was like 4 fucking gallons of Kevlar scraps. And I just assumed that Dunham had been facing the fucking grenade when it went off. and that it had blown his helmet apart. But a couple days later, when I was in the 4th platoon area where their racks were, and I was sitting on a cot next to Sanders. Talked to him about how he was doing. And Ferg was there, and Sanders told me this story. 2 weeks or maybe a month before that, they were still in Lehman Company's position. There had been this conversation that Kilo 4 had while they were on a break between patrols. And the inevitable question comes up, what do you do with a fucking live grenade? You look at the fucking Medal of Honor book that's thicker than the fucking Bible, and easily half the citations in there are goddamn Marines and soldiers who've covered fucking grenades to save their buddies. So the question had come up, and Dunham apparently had this theory that you could cover it with your fucking Kevlar. And because it was designed to protect the wearer from the outside, from small arms fire and fragmentation, that you could diffuse the blast of a grenade by covering it with a fucking Kevlar. I guess Dunham and Ferg and Robinson and a couple of the Marines were having this conversation, and Dunham proposed his theory, and Lieutenant Robinson said, well, a grenade's got a 3 to 5 second fuse. There's no way you're getting a fucking helmet on top of a grenade before it goes off. And Dunham says, really? And he stepped off, and he came back with his fucking helmet on, and he looked at Lieutenant Robinson, and he said, time me. So Bull grabbed his G-Shock, and he fucking hit the timer, and within a second, Dunham had tilted his head forward and slapped the fucking helmet on the deck. And Bull's like, fuck. And Ferg says, well, it's still going to fuck you up. And Robinson says, well, maybe the best thing to do is maybe cover it and then get your sappy plate, your fucking body armor on top of it too. Maybe that would be the best thing to do. So I'm listening to goddamn Sanders tell me this fucking story. And it dawned on me, he didn't have his helmet on when the fucking grenade went off. He covered the goddamn thing. Because there's just no way that if it had been on his head, that, his head wouldn't have been fucking blown apart instead of the helmet, which hadn't occurred to me there in the HK that shitty day. And I walked right out of there, and I walked right over to the fucking battalion CP and walked into the colonel's office, and I told Lieutenant Colonel Lopez what Sanders had just told me. And Lopez looks at me and he said, write it up. And I left. I went back. Lieutenant Robinson up. I know you've only been a platoon commander for 4 fucking months and you're a second lieutenant, but you're about to write a fucking Medal of Honor citation. So Bull sat down and started writing it, and Rudy helped him with it. And that was how it happened. That may have gone a little bit afield from what your original question was.
I wouldn't change a word of it. Yeah, that's powerful.
That's the context of it all.
So the final answer was he does jump on this grenade with the Kevlar first. I actually remember when this happened because I was in Iraq at Baghdad waiting to go up north to Mosul. And I remember because the 4 contractors got hung off the bridge around that time too. And it was crazy over there where you guys were.
Yeah.
They actually wanted to send us over there. Like, can you guys just go over and help over there, for a little while on your soft-sided Toyotas? And, we're like, help? Like, are you assigning us to go over there, or are we just helping?
Yeah, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And then no patrols would go that way with us because it was just, they're like, hell no. Like, so I'm trying to give some context to the audience and how dangerous that area was during that time. Even even far west as Abu Ghraib to go do anything was really dicey back then. So I totally remember this whole thing where he covers it and jumped on it. That's crazy.
Yeah. And the whole damn province just went to hell in a handbasket on 9th of fucking April. Fucking Ramadi, Al-Qaim, all of it. Hundreds of foreign fighters had infiltrated across the Syrian border, set up shop, and they were there to fucking fight. Yeah. They were there to fight. That's it. There was no hey, we're going to fucking, attack these Americans with some IEDs. They were there to fucking fight. The first fight we had was that night that Torres was killed on the 9th. And they initiated with an IED to stop the fucking patrol. And they opened up. And in my estimation, it was no shit a fucking kilometer wide, that ambush. And there had to have been 40 to 50. And that was just one side of it. They were in a double-sided ambush. 2 back-to-back ambushes. One oriented south on Jade, and the other one was oriented north on Diamond. And I had 2 fucking squads get hit. Kilo 4-1 got hit by the by the northern ambush element, and they fucking did what Marines are supposed to do, which is attack through the fucking ambush. They cleared it out. They killed 1 guy in the process, and they called up 3-3, who had just passed them going west to drop off a fucking patrol at the western end of Carabla. And Staff Sergeant Lott, the split section leader for that cat section that was carrying 3-3 into zone, he got the fucking call from the Beast. Corporal Jack Self from Texas was the vehicle commander who called to fucking Staff Sergeant Lott. And he said, hey, we got him on the fucking move. We're pushing him south. We cleared him out. Fucking cut him off. And Staff Sergeant Lott thought, finally, because we've been over there getting hit with IEDs, no fucking direct contact, not even seeing the fucking enemy, right? So when you get a chance to fucking get in a fight, a no shit face-to-face fight, that's what you've been waiting for. And so Lott punched east, and he left Kilo 3-3 behind. So his only dismounted firepower, that rifle squad, he left, and they fucking flew east and ran square into a kilometer-long ambush with no way to fucking fight back except just shoot back from your own fucking vehicle. And that we lost PFC Torres in that. He was a goddamn radio operator turned driver turned fucking rifleman who had kicked open his fucking door every time they bound another 200 meters to set up a base of fire to let the other 2 vehicles bound ahead, in the fucking classic break contact drill. They were on their last bound out of the kill zone, and Torres was opening his fucking door to the ambush, nothing between him and enemy fire but fucking thin air, and he caught a fucking RPK burst to the face.
Talk to me about what your decision process was from a leadership standpoint when you're standing there with Colonel Lopez and he says, write it up. They said, write up a Medal of Honor. Was that your decision?
He didn't say, it was understood. You knew, yeah.
There's not many Medal of Honor recipients from this war. We could go down that rabbit hole about how broken our award system is, which we've talked about a little on previous shows and in the sidelines. But how do you make that decision when one guy does one thing and other guys are casualties and die fighting for the same brothers you're standing right next to make that one singular decision, say, because there's no criteria, there's no textbook that says you have to do this, but you pick that one guy.
And there hadn't been one for what, 40 years?
Yeah, since Vietnam.
Since Vietnam.
No, not Marine.
Not a Marine. Right.
The only other ones were
the Army guy at the airport who was fighting out of that Bradley.
Yep, starting first class.
Yep.
Clark, I think.
I don't
or
remember
Smith. And 2 in Somalia.
Somalia, yeah.
Tell me what led you to that decision, how difficult it was to write it, and then the follow-on frustration about getting it approved.
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
What led you to that decision, how difficult it was to write it, and then the follow-on frustration about getting it approved?
It wasn't a difficult decision at all. It was a fucking given. As soon as I understood what really happened, it went without saying it was a foregone conclusion that was a Medal of Honor action. And that's why Lopez didn't have to say anything but write it up. And I wasn't even asking for his permission. I was telling him, this is what's coming. And I think the most important thing about it for me was to have Robinson do it. I eventually, scrubbed the citation before he forwarded up the chain, but Dunham belonged to Robinson, and it was Robinson's responsibility to write that. And it didn't matter that he was a second lieutenant with 4 years in the fleet. That's not the first second lieutenant to ever have to fucking do that, So it was just a foregone conclusion. It wasn't a difficult thing at all, except the gravity of it, realizing that you were submitting something that, if it came to fruition, was going to go in the book, the fucking book, with all those other citations of men who had given their lives to save their fellow Marines and soldiers. And once we launched it, there was a bit of quiet for a while. And then the next question is, okay, well, how do we know that's what happened? Well, we want to see the helmet. Okay. Thankfully, we fucking had it. So we took those 4 gallons of Kevlar and gave them to the battalion XO, Major Anthony Henderson, and he boxed them up, and he had the foresight to write a letter of provenance for the helmet.
Chain of custody.
Yeah. And he taped it to the outside of the box that said, hey, these are the remains of Corporal Jason Dunham's Kevlar helmet. It belonged to 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. This is the date it happened, blah, blah, blah. And then that box got sent up to Blue Diamond to 1st Mardiv. And we never saw it again until 2009. I had just graduated Command and Staff College, and I was headed west on I-40 to take over as XO at 27. And I got a call from Deb Dunham, and she said, they found it. I said, found what? She said, the helmet. I said, okay. And she said, I don't want to see it. I don't care what you fucking do with it. I don't want to see it. But I trust you to decide what needs to be done. And that's getting off topic. To answer your question, then, that it was a long process for that medal to get approved, right? And I remember I was in Buffalo, New York, and I was getting ready to drive down to the Dunhams, and the medal had not been approved yet. Or maybe it had. I can't fucking remember. But I was talking to, at the time, Major General John Kelly, who during 04 was the assistant division commander for 1st Mardiv under Mattis. And he had called me to give me an update on where the medal was in this system. I think he was waiting for SecNav approval at the time.
This is 5 years later.
No, this was, I want to say it was over 2 years later. I want to say it was in 07.
April 04 he dies, and then
it was I think it was early 07. Yeah. And I want to say, if my memory serves me correctly, I haven't won any awards with it lately, but I'm pretty sure it was April 07, and we were headed down to SIO to dedicate the goddamn post office. The townspeople of SIO were dedicating their post office to Jason Dunham. And so Deb invited us there for that, and Rudy came, and Dave Fleming came, and several other Kilo Marines came, and I think General Magnus came and spoke at that. So I just flown into the Buffalo airport. I got a call from General Kelly, so I pull over to the side of the road. I'm sitting in a fucking parking lot, and I've got a major general who spent 20 minutes on the phone with me complaining about the Marine Corps award system. And I'm a fucking young major, and I'm like, holy fuck. And he said something I'll never forget. He put it in stark perspective. He said, do you realize that John Basilone, in less time than it has taken our nation to decide that Dunham deserves a Medal of Honor, John Basilone had earned the fucking Medal of Honor, come back stateside, ran a few goddamn war bond drives, and then gone back and got his ass shot off on fucking Iwo Jima in less time than it has taken us to approve the Medal of Honor for Dunham. Yeah. And this is a computer age. And back then, they were fucking communicating by goddamn
ships.
Telegraph. By fucking telegraph, right? On the Trans-Pacific cable. What the fuck?
Yeah, we have seen the level of frustration at every level. I mean, Mattis writes about it in his book. Kelly's talking to you on the phone about it. Senior level officials have done it. What do you think, since we're talking about it and you're very outspoken, fast forward November of that year, Rafael Peralta dives on a grenade. And let's clear that up too, is that there were other Marines around Jason, and he wasn't just testing a theory on a random errant grenade thrown. He was saving the lives of those that are around him. And he dives on a grenade. Who does that? Someone that just instantaneously wants to, it's like a mother instinct protecting her kids.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. And then November comes around and there's the same scrutiny put on Sergeant Rafael Peralta about him diving on a grenade to save his Marines. And it's interesting, you shared with the audience that, this forensic set of glasses that our military leaders put on to say, well, I need to examine the Kevlar. Was it really a bag of, fluff now torn into ribbon shreds? And prove that he did that, and to question the integrity of the Marines, the officers that served alongside of him. And then what Peralta did as well. And I was a fraction of that process. I stood in the Chief of Staff's office at 1st Mardiv when they found his flak jacket and wanted it sent to Kniess in DC to do this forensic examination. The thread got pulled on that, and they would not award the Medal of Honor. And there was water cooler chatter saying, we're no longer going to give the nation's highest award, the Medal of Honor, to people who dive on grenades, because that is not a smart tactical thing to do. That's what was being discussed.
Are you fucking serious?
Oh, I'm absolutely 100% accurate on that. And I'm not going to quote anyone on who said that. But the thought of it makes my blood boil, and I will go off the rails if you get me talking about it too much. And I can look at Trent's face too and think it's astounding to me. And that's why I asked the question, is that frustration that we all feel as people that fight and serve and have to explain the actions of these brave young men and women, I think is something that the public really doesn't comprehend, aside from everything that goes on. And I think what we hear from you and what this story, the gift is giving audiences ultimately when it gets produced, Dave, is it's emblematic. And Trent is a commander can understand, like, you write those awards and you'd write them all for all the guys. If it was a perfect world, everyone would get a stupid piece of ribbon and a shiny emblem to hang on their chest. But it's really emblematic of what all of those guys did. The other couple hundred Marines you led that you had to take care of throughout that patrol. And I think for the most part, the majority of the Marines and soldiers that fight understand that as like, yeah, he was one of ours. He did do great things. And I think that this connection with Deb and the rest of the family, our Gold Star families, that bonds us so uniquely, is something that it does really bring any hardened warrior to tears, to think that these people are out there, that they still want to give us this continued love after witnessing and experiencing the worst part of their entire life, is seeing their son die. That's tough. But I think that by sharing this film and all of the people as we sit around these kitchen tables sharing that story. We rope people in like Rick and so many others to share it. I think the question I would just leave you with is, why is it so important for you to share those surrounding events when there's been a book written about what he did?
Well, for me personally, in my opinion, you kind of touched on it. People don't understand or don't realize it goes beyond just the act of he, jumped on a grenade and killed himself. There's all the repercussions that come afterwards that people really don't hear about. Kelly Miller and Bill Hampton. These are lives who had kids and got married and started their lives, and their life continues, but it wouldn't have happened. I look at we went to a podcast, all of us, a few months back, and I couldn't help but sit there and stare at Kelly's kid, Jet Jason Miller. And cute little kid, right? And you're just looking at him, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, this kid wouldn't be here because they all would have died, And people don't know that part of it. Yeah. They just know the glorious, he dove on a grenade and he sacrificed himself. That's so heroic. But there's so much more that goes into that afterwards, all those lives that are affected for the good and the bad. There's a lot more good, I think, that has come of it. We're all sitting here because of what he did. Yeah. We're connected to Deb and Dan for what he did. I'm connected to your father who lives near here for what he did. Rick and I are connected to this story, and I've connected him to all these people. And it's like a spider web that goes out. And all these people are connected, and it's showing all these good things and some bad that continue to happen. A perfect example is Castaneda, and this text message he sent. We released that video on Veterans Day, the day after we did Jocko's podcast. And he sent me a text of him with his kids at the school on Veterans Day. And he said, I never would have went to these things in the past because I shied away from that. I didn't want to talk about it. He's the one in the thing that said, I just wanted to do my job that day, but I couldn't. And he said, I just want to thank you. I just watched that trailer and I wanted to thank you because it made me realize what Jason gave me. And it's these two kids that call me dad. And I read that and I cried because that meant more to me. And it's just something that makes you real. Just me as a person made me realize how important that act has become and what it has done to these guys. And they continue to beat themselves up for it. They all do. But it's just to be able to sit down and talk about it and get it out. Every interview we do, right? That's the
best answer I could have ever gotten. That type of unsolicited feedback for what you're doing, I think is tough. And the other thing, as a storyteller, how do you bring this story to life and share those good things that come of it? Because as veterans and guys that are fighting, the public always wants to kind of look with sad eyes and say, oh, we're sorry for your loss and this, and it was so tough. But no, we don't want to be those guys. I don't want to be a guy like that. How important is it to share the positive things? When I look at this and you see the bloody body of some soldier or Marine being loaded on a Kazakh helicopter, you're like, oh, I'm not going to want to watch this. How do you present that to the public so they want to see all of these things in 90 minutes and give 90 minutes of their lives?
Well, I think, when we started out, our whole goal was to help soldiers, Marines, whomever, talk about shit, right? And we're like, what could we possibly do? And this story was an in as far as you're talking about a selfless, unbelievably mind-boggling, heroic act. You're talking about the guys who survived and live with the guilt of that, survivors, right? And it's that when we started out, it was that Saving Private Ryan question. Have I been a good man? Did I live a good life? And all these guys struggle with it all the time. And Dave got a call the other night, there's a guy who's like, I'm fucked up again, and it's like, how do we keep a conversation going that's a healthy conversation, giving something back, like just trying to get your shit out there and, like he said, create a community. And it's more than just like, hey, there's the business side of it, there's the storytelling side of it, there's whatever. But then it's like all these other people have gotten together and developed relationships and a support system. And having a conversation with like a documentary that tells a story like this gets other guys out there talking, it gets people to be like, hey, like we were talking to somebody the other day and he said he'd lost touch with a buddy of his and, he had a desk job and his buddy went out and went to Afghanistan for 6 months and he came back and the guy was like this super jovial, fun cat, he came back and he's like, man, he was just a shell of himself. Like he couldn't even function. And he's like, I try to call him, I try to do things and I don't get any response, and it's that whole, like, you got to keep calling, right? Yeah. You got to keep just the guy knows you're there. So
I got to ask you this question.
Yeah.
The film is by veterans, for veterans. Why don't you make the film for the public? Because I understand that these guys need a network and hey, call me, man, if you're feeling like drinking again and sticking a gun in your mouth. I get that. We know those guys. How important is it to make the film for the public, who are the majority of people that don't know about service and sacrifice, that can see a guy who says, oh, that's that guy from the Marine Corps tribe, and we're the vast majority of the public that have never served, and to identify those signs or people that are hurting or they're low? I got to ask that question, because isn't that important for you when you make a product, when you make a film and you give so much of yourself and you pull emotion from other people, to really make it more than that 0.5% of the American population?
Well, absolutely. I mean, like with any project, with any story, you want to, like any podcast, you want everybody to be able to connect to it, not just, you don't want to just pigeonhole yourself, right? Sure. And I mean, honestly, it's like, that's just, the idea was, let's put guys to work on some shit we can all get behind, and so when you say by veterans, for veterans, like, look, I'm not a war fighter. I mean, yeah, I served on an aircraft carrier, during Desert Storm, but I've never been on the boots on the ground or anything like that. But I'm a vet and I want to get a message out there that, hey, it's okay to talk about this shit, right? I mean, your question is absolutely valid in that, asking why we wouldn't want to have other people identify with it, but we do, and I guess that's just like, in a non-cynical way, it's a way for us to sell this thing, right? Like, we're not looking for exclusion. We're looking for inclusion, but it's a way for us to get the community behind it to reach a broader audience.
Right. So I think that maybe as it's developed, is the byproduct that it helps veterans, or is the byproduct it helps the public?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
My intention from the beginning is to get guys to sit down like this and talk, but it's also to get civilians to look at it in a different light. Like, wow, I never thought of it like that. And, because the majority of people out there have nothing to do with the military, right? So and I use that analogy, or I don't know if you call it an analogy, but, after watching this, I would hope that a civilian, because you always hear that, catchphrase when you're out in an airport, and you guys, I'm sure, in uniform have heard it. Thank you for your service. But do those people really know what they're saying? All the time. And I understand that they don't know much about the military, sure. But after watching this, I would hope the next time they do that, they're going to know, because they're going to hear Billy's story. They're going to hear Kelly's story. And they're not all sad stories. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's important. We talk about that all the time, because you don't want it to be about, oh, I'm a broken down vet, It's like, yeah, I went through this.
That story.
Yeah.
That's
right.
the whole,
and that's Hollywood story too.
And that's the whole point of this entire thing, is to find some light in all of it, and to understand and just show whoever else, the message is like, you're not alone, in coping with your shit. Like, there's other people out there, and there is a way
And I think
that everybody can get.
And I
home.
think people, the civilian world, are going to relate to this story too, just on the emotional, human aspect of it. You know, it's like I talked about this a while ago. It seeing Kelly's kid and seeing Billy's kids. It reminded me of Schindler's List at the end of the movie when you see those generations of Jews who are putting rocks on Schindler's grave, and they're all alive because of what Schindler did. So we see these kids, and that's what I think about. You know. And I think people are going to relate to that, especially when they hear from those kids.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That would make me tune in. That would make me subscribe, thinking I'm not a guy that spent 24 years in the Marine Corps. Because a lot of people think this is what we do. We just march around with a rifle on our shoulder and, hub tube. And it's all about either the fighting and the combat, and the friction or the loss. But that's something I think people will really want to get behind for the Gift documentary and the connection, not just of those surrounding that singular day. Everything that's come after that is really the powerful message that I think you're bringing to everyone with this project, man. It's going to be huge. And I'm a big supporter of this. You've got a lot of support behind it right now. And like many in the veteran space. And again, I thank you for your service, anybody that served. And, you don't have to quantify it by guys that raised the right hand and took an oath, and to share this with other guys in the documentary film world and make this different and have everyone support it. You're going to be really one of the plank owners for this generation of war and sharing these stories. And I think it's important because I don't want to wait 50 years to share this story. I want it to be told now. Before Trent's 70 years old and he can't remember which shoe to tie
Wait,
first.
you're not 70?
Yeah.
I'm 70.
I just think it's really important. So if people want to support the film, let's just get into it and tell people where to go to support the film.
Yeah, you can find us on Facebook at The Gift Documentary. On Instagram's the same thing, at The Gift Documentary, and Twitter is at The Gift Doc.
So all these years later, Dunham's still leading, obviously. He's got all his peers out there trying to, appreciate the gift, lived up to the standard. What has he taught you?
You don't get to fucking arrive as a leader and then call it good and hang your shit up, right? It's something that you have to earn every day from your Marines. You don't get to just hang that as a title around your neck and then fucking walk off into the goddamn sunset, right? It's something you have to earn every day. And I think that's what a good leader does, is they feel a sense of obligation to their Marines to not let them down, right? I mean, he extended his deployment. He extended his enlistment so that he could make that entire deployment. He was supposed to EAS in July. But once he was assigned squad leader, he extended his EAS, and he told his Marines, he said, I'm staying the whole fucking time. You guys are there, I'm going to be there because I'm going to bring y'all back to life. And he kept his fucking promise. Every Marine from Kilo 42 fucking came back alive.
Do you, now that you've learned all these lessons, do you get up and take that picture now, whatever that moment is?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No. I don't miss a chance to hug a Marine. I don't miss a chance to fucking get a photo. And there's another lesson about missing hugs that I'll forever regret with another Marine that was killed from 1-7, Lieutenant Ron Winchester, in September during our turnover with 1-7. But yeah, I learned a lot during that deployment about putting aside the expectations of machismo or stoic leadership as in its traditional sense, where men don't fucking cry and don't show emotion. That's all bullshit. But I learned that it's good to be human, and that few Marines appreciate a human being. You know, like, and Dunham's a perfect example of that, right? He was crowned leader because he was a good fucking human being.